20 years since its genocide, we report on the Hutus who fled to neighbouring Democratic Republic of Congo after the Tutsis took power. About 2 million people crossed the border, including militiamen who took part in the slaughter, and they set up the FDLR, the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, the self-proclaimed defenders of Hutu refugees. France 24's correspondents Lisa Westerhoff and Mehdi Medeb have been to meet them.
It may look like they are celebrating, but this is actually a political song. These Rwandan refugees are calling on their president to start a dialogue so they can go back home. The dancing is not spontaneous. Every detail has been carefully organized by the Rwandan Hutu rebels for us journalists to see. Their aim is to display these Hutu women and children as victims, abandoned by the international community, they say, afraid to return to Rwanda.
People are being killed, imprisoned. Even now there are people who flee Rwanda and come here every day. So how can you say it's possible to go back, when at the same time, people are still fleeing their homeland?
For the last 20 years, the FDLR say they have been protecting these Rwandan Hutu refugees. Back in '94, when Tutsis took power in Rwanda, hundreds of thousands of Hutus fled the country, fearing reprisal attacks. They settled in villages like this one, in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. But even here, they were hunted down by the Rwandan army and tens of thousands were killed.
I don't want to go back to Rwanda because of what I saw and what the Tutsis have done over the past 20 years. They're still chasing me.
Those responsible for these post-genocide massacres have never been brought to justice. Today, the Rwandan rebels are on a mission. No guns, no uniforms. They want to look respectable. The FDLR say they have disarmed and are ready for a political dialogue. But their position on the genocide is still very ambiguous.
A genocide? Really? I don't know. You have to ask someone else. We have more important matters to deal with than to recognize a genocide or not. I don't think the judiciary is the one that can say who was a perpetrator of a genocide and who was not.
The FDLR claim their struggle is non-violent, but for the past 20 years they have been living off the back of the Congolese population, looting and attacking villages, often with extreme brutality.
The FDLR have caused us a lot of problems. One night they came here, they undressed me even though I was 6 months pregnant. They beat me up, as well as my kids. They have taken everything. Because of the trauma, I lost the child.
While Rwanda is commemorating the genocide in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the FDLR rebels still haven't disarmed, and villages like this one still pay the price for a 20-year-old conflict that didn't take place in their country. 20 years later, these Hutu refugees have decided to go back home. Not an easy decision to make after so many years away from their country.
These last 20 years in the Democratic Republic of Congo weren't easy. We were moving all the time. But now it's all over. There's no more war. So it's time for me to go back home. I'm very happy about that. I'm not afraid anymore, and I won't have any problems because there's security there now.
Feelings of joy mixed with fear. After years spent hiding in the forest under the influence of FDLR propaganda in Rwanda, they worry about what they will find on the other side.
Someone who spent 20 years in the bush in the Congolese forest and then comes back to Rwanda needs some time to adapt. The changes make them hesitant. They're also concerned about the judiciary. Since the UNHCR started the repatriation operation, more than 100,000 people have gone back to Rwanda.
A few meters away, Rwanda, and a long-awaited return for these Hutu refugees, who now hope for a peaceful future in their home country.
Now, for more on the situation of Rwandan refugees in the Democratic Republic of Congo, I'm now joined from London by Karina Tertsakian. She's the senior researcher on Rwanda at Human Rights Watch. Hello, and thank you very much for being with us. Now, first of all, from our report, it seems the FDLR isn't defending or protecting Hutu refugees, but rather manipulating them, intimidating them. Is that fair?
Certainly, yes. I mean, we have to remember that the FDLR is a very violent armed group. In all the time that it has been operating in eastern Congo, it has carried out horrific attacks against Congolese civilians. But also, it has been manipulating, using and brutalizing Rwandan civilian refugees. For example, by spreading false information about the situation in Rwanda, by using women as sexual slaves for their commanders, by forcibly recruiting Rwandan civilians into its ranks to become fighters. And probably the most serious aspect in the last couple of years is that the FDLR has exposed Rwandan refugees to attacks by rival Congolese armed groups. There's one particular armed group, the Raya Mutomboki, that particularly targets Hutus in this part of eastern Congo. And this group has killed, raped, and carried out horrific abuses against Rwandan refugees.
Is this situation unique? I mean, how does it compare to Rwandan refugees in other countries, such as Uganda or Kenya, for example?
I think it's a very different situation because there's a much larger number of Rwandan Hutu refugees in Congo, whereas the refugees in Uganda or Kenya, there will be some Hutu, there will be some Tutsi, but they are also not grouped together in that way. And there isn't the similar heavy presence of the FDLR. In eastern Congo, it's a situation, particularly in the areas where these refugees are living. These are very remote, inaccessible areas where the FDLR can control territory and there's no real state presence by the Congolese authorities. So the FDLR are able to not only manipulate these refugees, but actually hold them hostage.
Now, you mentioned before the effect on Congolese civilians of having the FDLR present, but the army of the Democratic Republic of Congo has pledged to eradicate the Hutu group. What state would you say it's in now? I mean, it's got far fewer fighters than before.
Well, that's right. The FDLR has been significantly weakened recently. They have fewer fighters, they've scattered around, but they are still there. They are still operating in these remote areas, and they do have the capacity to continue carrying out acts of extreme violence against the civilian population. So as we speak now, the threat of that group against local populations has still not been dealt with.
And what do you make of Paul Kagame's dealing of the situation, so to speak? I mean, he's credited with developing Rwanda economically, but when it comes to his human rights record, it's a different story, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, yes. I mean, Rwanda has come a long way in the last 20 years in terms of development and economic growth, and there is at least a superficial stability there. But in terms of human rights, there has not been a corresponding progress. Rwanda is a country today where there are very severe restrictions on free speech, where people are not able to participate in democratic processes. And this is actually one of the reasons why many Rwandan refugees are still afraid of returning to their country.
Now, as we saw in our report, a lot of them are returning, but you mentioned before the misinformation. Just how widespread is this misinformation?
Well, the misinformation spread by the FDLR has been going on for many years. What we have to remember is that most of these Rwandan refugees in Congo have been out of their country for almost 20 years now. The vast majority of them left towards the end of the genocide in 1994. So some of them may genuinely not have access to reliable information about what's happening in the country. Now, for sure, as we've just said, there is a very worrying human rights situation in Rwanda today. And certain people, particularly those who are associated with the FDLR, may be targeted and may become victims of abuses in Rwanda. But it's not a situation of massive violence. It's not a situation where every Rwandan refugee who returns is going to get killed, as the FDLR leaders sometimes claim. So what is important is for each Rwandan refugee individually to be able to have the correct information to make the decision as to whether they feel safe returning or not.
In our report, we hear one refugee saying that she's prepared to return home now because it's safe to do so. So you would say that is in fact the case now?
Well, I wouldn't say it across the board, no. I mean, it depends on the particular individual and the profile of the person who's returning. So there have been quite a lot of people who've returned to Rwanda and have not had any problems, but there have also been plenty who have, and particularly those who have remained in Congo for 20 years may be viewed with suspicion. They may be viewed as members of the FDLR even when they are not. And Human Rights Watch has documented, for example, arbitrary arrests, prosecutions and other kinds of abuses against Rwandan Hutu who have returned, particularly from Congo, in recent years. So we can't say that anyone who returns is going to be fine, but equally we can't say that anyone who returns is necessarily going to have problems. It will all depend on that person's situation.
Okay, Karina Tertsakian from Human Rights Watch, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's go now to a quick break. The headlines when we come back, including France's new Prime Minister facing a confidence vote in Parliament. We'll go live to the National Assembly shortly. Stay tuned.
Kigali Revisited. 20 years after the genocide, Rwanda's capital city is a monument to modernity. All districts of Kigali have been renovated and its roads repaved, though sometimes at the expense of the most deprived. The memory of the genocide can never be erased, but Rwandans are moving on. Mixed marriages between Hutus and Tutsis are happening again. Kigali Revisited on France 24 and on France24.com.